Well, hello again. I'm joined this time by the composer, conductor, organist, professor of choral conducting, writer, Paul Spicer. Paul's biography of Arthur Bliss came out recently, eminently readable and informative. And previously, we've had books on Herbert Howells and George Dyson. Well, Paul, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here and nice to see you.
Well, the reason for inviting you onto this Vaughan Williams Society series at this moment is that on the 28th of September, upcoming, you're leading an open choral workshop on Vaughan Williams's cantata Dona Nobis Pacem, 1930s work. And this takes place in Petersfield in preparation for a Petersfield Musical Festival performance of Dona Nobis Pacem next year, and you're the festival conductor. I think, first of all, especially for our listeners on the other side of the world, Paul, you should tell us something about where Petersfield is and something about the history of this festival.
Yes, Petersfield. First of all, is sort of in the south of England. It's about half an hour or so south of Winchester, and quite close to Portsmouth. Sort of in that area of the country. It's a very attractive market town with a lovely ancient church in the middle of it, and it has this rather grandly named festival hall. Which is nothing like its South Bank namesake. But the festival itself has been going for over 100 years, and it was actually founded, and I think I'm right in saying, in 1901 by two sisters who had experienced the Mary Wakefield Festival up in Kendal in Cumbria. That's up in the north of England, and it's that they loved the idea that in Kendal there was this competitive music festival where choirs came together and were adjudicated by various distinguished musicians, and then they joined together in the evenings to do an orchestrally accompanied concert. And that is really what exactly the format that was taken up in Petersfield only 4 years later, as I say, in 1901. And then the Leith Hill Festival, which of course your listeners will know much about, was begun in response to both of these festivals just a few years later by Vaughan Williams' sister, Margaret.
As the expression has it, not many people know that. It is very
Yes.
interesting to see that
Yeah.
that was the immediate precedent for the Leith Hill Festival that Vaughan Williams was involved in so integrally for so many years. Well, let's think about the chorus that you're directing. We've got the open workshop, but open presumably means that anybody can come along and
Yeah.
just sing.
Yes.
And then you've got the performance next year. Does it imply that if you come along to the open workshop, you'll necessarily or you'll automatically qualify for singing in the performance in the festival proper?
No, not at all. If people come along and decide that they've enjoyed the experience and then want to sign up to join the festival chorus, they're very welcome to do that. And it's an unauditioned chorus, so anybody can join in, certainly. But the nucleus of the festival chorus is local choral societies, small, basically fairly small choral societies, Rogate, Fernhurst and Petersfield. And then we have a number of what we call independents who come in the way that I'm perhaps describing, people who just want to come and sing and join up, but actually not have perhaps the regular commitment of singing in a local choir. And we have quite a lot of those as well. So, and there are two concerts we at the moment anyway. We have one at the beginning of the festival and one at the end, and they're two different choirs, but an awful lot of people join in and do both the concerts. So it's quite a big thing, really. But this concert with the Dona Nobis Pacem is one of the obviously one of the major things we do, and it's marvelous. It's been going, they achieve extraordinary things really for relatively local amateur singers, and we've done some really big works in the past.
Well, I love this idea, Paul, of
Yeah.
you being a sort of hub for these local
Mm,
choirs, like
mm,
satellites around Petersfield. And that, of course, is very much a Leith Hill Festival thing as well. You
yes.
remember that Vaughan Williams used to, and others, I presume, used to travel around to the individual choirs around Dorking, training them up, and then they all came together for
Yes.
something special at the end.
In my case, and of course Jonathan Wilcox, who does the Leith Hill Festival, who is also incidentally president of the Petersfield Festival, and whose orchestra, the Southern Pro Musica, we use for one of the concerts every year. Both he and I don't necessarily do all the individual rehearsals. I mean, I go down because I live in the Midlands and travel down, so I go down, I think, 4 times for each of the concerts to do these joint rehearsals. But then they're rehearsed individually by their own choral societies, and then they come together for these joint rehearsals. They're always very joyful occasions. It's
Absolutely,
very
I'm sure
nice
it
to do.
was. So, well, look, why the choice of Dona Nobi's part, Shem?
Well, there are a number of things, really. I think perhaps first and foremost, and I should also say that I've just done it, albeit in a workshop format at the English Choral Experience course I run at Abbey Door in Herefordshire. We did this last month in July, and I've done the piece a number of times before as well. But the reason really for choosing it this time is mostly because of what's going on in the world. We are in terrible times as a world. And never has there been, well, not never, of course, but in recent times, and especially I think affecting all of us in the West, have there been a more pressing reason for doing something which is a deeply felt prayer for peace. And that, I think, is something which I think we all feel very strongly. And I don't know another work that I can think of really which expresses more personally and more viscerally this deep need for humanity to live in peace with each other than this work of Vaughan Williams is.
Well, this demands that we go back to the time when it was complete into the 1930s and dark clouds in Europe. So tell us something about that context, why it was composed when it was.
Well, Vaughan Williams, when the First World War broke out, was in his 40s. And sort of typically of him, really, as a real man of the people. I think I'd love to have known him, but the sort of feeling that he was someone who been to grand public schools and lived in grand houses and everything else, but no, none of that. He didn't want to become a commissioned officer. He wanted to go and be a stretcher bearer in France, and just be an ordinary member of a team of people. But the experience was horrific, as anybody could imagine. To taking mutilated bodies, dead bodies, partly living bodies, people with limbs blown off. I mean, it's so difficult to even for us, lucky people who haven't had to experience anything like that in our lifetimes. God, we've been a lucky generation, really, and I think the feeling that he went through all that, and yes, okay, he then became a commissioned second lieutenant, and then went into the Royal Artillery, and then of course he was deeply affected by the whole gunfire, and of course that created deafness in his later age, and so on. And the whole experience of that, I think meant that he needed to express this in the best way that a musician, a composer can, in his own way, and find. And I think one of the miracles of this piece also is not just the way that he expresses himself musically in it, but also his incredibly astute choice of texts, and his choice of Walt Whitman,
Yes, but
who was
this is
obviously very powerful.
extraordinary, isn't it, Paul? It's extraordinary. We've had Whitman used in the Sea Symphony, abundant optimism, pre-Great War, and now Whitman is being put to a completely different use.
Yes, but Whitman also, don't forget, wrote very powerfully about the Civil War in America. So you know, there was this very, you know, this humanist approach, where the spirit was what mattered, not necessarily that there was any sort of God. And of course, I think that an awful lot of First World War, well, anybody involved in either of the wars, people who had faith tended to lose their faith because they can, the sort of feeling that how could a merciful God allow such atrocities to happen in apparently in his name. So it's I think this whole feeling that the power of the spirit, which is you know, it doesn't, you don't have to have a religious faith, but we all know the spirit of the human being is what drives all of us. And I think nobody felt that more powerfully than either Whitman or, in response to it, Vaughan Williams, really.
So we've got the appalling Great War experience that you've described, but that experience is brought forward into the 1930s when the situation, let's describe the situation that he's then faced with, that he fears. Even though it's obvious, why not explain it to us?
What do you mean with the advent of the Second World War?
Yeah, on the
And
horizon, on the horizon.
um, it's the hopelessness of the fact that what he was asking for or praying for could never be achieved, and of course we can see that to this day, and presumably humankind will always go on. You know, it's very difficult to imagine that there won't be people who excite hostilities between. I mean, you know, there will always be people like Putin, unfortunately, I'm sure, which is a terrible shame.
Yes, I suppose the question is, you mentioned hopelessness. There you are in the middle of the 1930s, the situation in Europe crumbling around you. If it's hopeless, why bother to make this statement?
Because there is always the other side of the coin, for human beings, that there will, I mean, in a way, I suppose it's why there is a church, why there are clergymen, you know, but because you cannot just accept that there will always be the bad side of the coin. There has to be a reverse to that, and there have to be prophet-like people who want to engage with that sense of hope. And I think, you know, I know that the Dirge for Two Veterans was written obviously before the rest of the work, but you know, when you look at the power of that, and you see the simply terrible thing of this father and son both being lost to this conflict. Somehow that is almost the most powerful, even though the rest of it was written around it. It sits so skillfully, as if the whole thing had been just written in sequence. It just goes, it's perfect for it. But I think, you know, in terms of just the sort of psychology of it, I think the feeling that whole families can be wiped out in this way. Surely there must be a better way. And then there's this amazing final movement, you know, where this visceral sense of joy and of optimism at the end. I think is really what it's all about.
Well, you've chosen it because of the dark situation in our world today. What you've just said, is that an expression of what you wish to convey to people sitting there in the audience for this?
Absolutely. I think that in a way, it's just getting people to think and to engage with the concepts, really. You can't direct how people will think. You can't direct which side people will support, if you like, in a situation of animosity. But nevertheless, it's the feeling that people must engage and understand that, whatever comfortable lives we may live in our particular fortunate situation, that it is nevertheless incredibly febrile. We have war happening on the edge of our own continent. It could very, very, very easily spread, and it's a very dangerous thought.
And I suppose, Paul, one of the functions of a piece like this, the darker sides of the piece, it just helps people to articulate their inner fears that perhaps don't come out in other ways.
Very good. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree about that. Absolutely. Um, and I think I was very taken by a piece that Vaughan Williams actually wrote. I might even just quote it. I've got it here because it's the feel. This is, and again, it's kind of Vaughan Williams at his most. No, let's put it the other way around. His least highfalutin. That can I just read this, because you probably know the quote yourself. It's being inspired by Verdi's Requiem for this work. Do you know about this? I think this where he says, by that time I had quite recovered from my Gounod fever and had become a complete prig. Bach, Beethoven, ex officio, Brahms and Wagner were the only composers worth considering. I heard Verdi's Requiem for the first time. At first, I was properly shocked by the frank sentimentalism and sensationalism of the music. I remember being particularly horrified at the drop of a semitone on the word donor. Was not this the purest village organist? But in a very few minutes, the music possessed me, and I realized that here was a composer who could do all the things which I, in my youthful pedantry, would thought wrong, indeed would be unbearable in a lesser man. Music which was sentimental, theatrical, occasionally even cheap, and yet was an overpowering masterpiece. And that day I learned that there is nothing in itself that is uncommon or unclean. Indeed, that there are no canons of art except that contained in the well-worn tag, to thine own self be true. And of course, the Dona Nobis Dona figure that he writes in the beginning has that exact semitone drop. I think it's just wonderful. Absolutely
Right.
wonderful.
Well, look, just finally, Paul, I mean,
Mm.
you've got the experience of writing a war-related piece, a great war-related piece yourself. This was written for 1914, the 100th anniversary of the start of the Great War, a work called Unfinished Remembering. And I know it's a bit of a cliched question, but I mean, is it difficult to follow in the footsteps of, well, plenty of other composers, not least British composers, who've had to reflect a war-torn century, the last century and the start of this century? Is it tricky for a composer to say, well, what do I say now?
No. Firstly, I'd just say that the work which accompanied Unfinished Remembering in that concert was Vaughan Williams's Dona Nobis Pacem. And there are actually rather few works from composers of that period, and Arthur Bliss's Morning Heroes being probably the other major work, remarkable work actually, that of Bliss's. But no, I don't think so, because I think we all have our own thing to say. And also, we all respond to a completely different libretto, however that name. And mine was especially written for that work by a poet called Ewan Tate. And so it wasn't a compilation of texts like Vaughan Williams's, for instance. And so you respond in a completely different way. And although this period of music is my specialism, and you know, I can well hear echoes of these composers, especially perhaps my own teacher Herbert Howells. You know, I think it is something which you just approach in a completely different way. So of course one feels the weight of great composers on one's shoulders. You know, no composer. It's like that John Donne quote, you know, no man is an island of himself. You know, I mean, it's absolutely true. We all have our inspirations and so on from previous great composers. But I think, and so I keep going off on slight tangents with this, but things keep occurring to me. It's like Stanford, who was probably the greatest composition teacher of the 20th century. You know, almost everybody coming, including Vaughan Williams, of course, coming out of his composition teaching room at the Royal College of Music, came through him. And he was desperately disappointed. He thought he was a failure as a composition teacher because nobody composed in his style. What he didn't realize, of course, was that was his greatest strength. He gave people the facility, the knowledge, and his experience as a composer, and the techniques. But then they all became their own men and women, and went on to produce an extraordinary variety of styles out of all those people. And I suppose in a way that's what I'm saying, that you know, yes, we have these inspirational composers sitting on our shoulders, but you then go on and you try and be your own man, really. You know?
Well, I must go and search for a recording of that, Paul, because I don't know Unfinished Remembering, and I'll look forward to hearing that. And we wish you all the best with the Dona Nobis choral workshop on the 28th of September and the performance next year. So anybody watching this who's anywhere near Petersfield, they can go on the Petersfield Festival website, presumably, and sign up for the choral workshop.
Yes, they can, absolutely. Yes, it's all there. So please do. The more the merrier.
Well, am I free on the 28th of September? Let's see. Maybe I am. But look, Paul Spicer, thank you so much. We're very, very grateful to you.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for asking me.